Good news about the Lonesome Roads Conspiracy Theory Hour on the Fox News channel is that fewer and fewer people have been watching. The bad news is, if he's going, Glenn Beck is going with a supernova of the stupid. Our number one story among the torrent of questionable religious views now spewing from the evangel of Fox News, Jesus Christ was killed by the Jews. This morning on his radio program, Beck and a caller agreed that the liberals are enemies of the Heavenly Father. Yesterday on his TV show, Beck unveiled his Mount Rushmore of 1960s civil rights icons. One person doing God's work was Beck's Fox News Channel boss.
Panthers and the threats causing Congress to pass the civil rights, that's bullcrap. God did it by working through people and inspiring people like Martin Luther King and C.L. Jackson, and yes, white people like Bobby Kennedy, and dare I say it, oh my gosh, I'm going to set the world on fire with this, Roger Ailes. I think he spent some time, the civil rights movement.
About an hour and a half. Roger Ailes in 2003. I booked Martin Luther King and sat in rooms like this with Martin Luther King and talked to him. He's a legendary civil rights leader for booking Martin Luther King on the Mike Douglas Show. Later on, Herman's Hermits. And then there's Glenn Beck on the death of Jesus Christ. Tuesday, he was discussing liberation theology when he let out a little chestnut that just might be enough to cheer up Mel Gibson.
Jesus conquered death. He wasn't victimized. He chose to give his life. He did have a choice. If he was a victim, and this theology was true, then Jesus would have come back from the dead and made the Jews pay for what they did. That's an abomination. Yeah, it is. It sort of is an abomination. Of course, it was the Romans who crucified Jesus Christ. In 1965, the Vatican was so worried about anti-Semitism, stemming from centuries of blaming them for that the Pope issued a formal position on the subject, and quoting the letter of Pope Paul VI, "True, the Jewish authorities and those who followed their lead pressed for the death of Christ. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all the Jews without distinction, then alive, nor against the Jews of today." It was the Catholic Church in 1965. Alexander Zaitchik has waded into the abyss to write Common Nonsense, Glenn Beck and the Triumph of Ignorance. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Thanks for having me.
The whole Jews killed Jesus thing, that's usually a pretty and understandably touchy point for not just Jewish people, but people in general. Has he got a little Mel Gibson situation on his hands here, or does nothing stick to this man?
Well, I think at this point in his career, it's clear that he can get through most situations, and there's not a problem that he doesn't have on his hands. He's, as a baseline, you got to remember this guy probably has the world record for being condemned by civil rights and advocacy organizations, usually more than once, going back to his top 40 days in radio.
But now we know that Roger Ailes was a civil rights leader, so he's got some street cred via Roger Ailes. I got to say, I didn't know Roger Ailes was a civil rights leader. Was he at Selma with John Lewis?
Well, I mean, if you live in a world where Barack Obama is a communist and Van Jones is a black nationalist revolutionary, then sure, why not? Roger Ailes was a giant of the civil rights movement.
Is this, I've always wondered in watching Beck if he is the sort of the personification of the guy who thinks because somebody tells him something that it is necessarily true and he's the only one who knows about it. And so there's a sort of wonderful confidence that he just has been privately revealed something that people don't know, like Roger Ailes was a civil rights leader. Is that the baseline, as you said, of the Glenn Beck experience? Like, boy, I found out something great. You've been lied to all this time. 2 + 2 = 86.
Well, that's certainly what he's selling, is the grand sort of scheme, the big map with the map key that only he has possession of, and only by watching his show with a notebook and pencil will you be able to follow along and figure out exactly who the devils are and who the angels are and be able to fight on the side of the angels. Yeah.
Based on your research for this book, he doesn't come up with all this stuff. He couldn't possibly come up with all this stuff himself. He would have to not sleep to have that many conspiracy theories. And I imagine that's possible too. But to my knowledge, there are consultants who tell him what his audience wants to hear, and he goes right off in that tangent. Is that correct?
He definitely has help. People provide him with scripts and facts that he proceeds to mangle, but he does have something to work off of, and the influences range from guys like Cleon Skousen, who's sort of off the chart nutty Mormon radicals from the last century to organizations like Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Works, which provide him with most of his sort of political scripts. And the religious stuff comes from rather fringe characters in the Mormon tradition.
I guess the one that he brought up yesterday, probably, or Tuesday, probably would be on the fringe. I know these things interweave, and it's very difficult to pin down which Beck you're going to get on one day or next. But there was, for a while, a sort of generic conservative Beck, and then that morphed in the last year and a half into this Thomas Paine, John Adams, Sam Adams, Don Adams Beck. And most recently, though, it's been more and more often Amy Semple McPherson Beck. Is there an evolution? Does he get tired of playing these roles and move on to something else? Or is he standing there like Barnard Hughes in the hospital with his hands up going, I am the fool for Christ, and the whatever else the rest of the statement was?
Yeah, I mean, the last few years there seems to have been a progression from delusions of grandeur, where he thinks he's the sort of new founding father, to straight up paranoid delusionary behavior, thinking God is speaking to and through him. At least that's what he's claiming. Whether he believes it or not fully, only Glenn Beck knows. But if in fact that is what he believes, then he's moved into new territory, Sister Amy territory, as you mentioned, where he is ready to start a church.
Is that, could that be, in addition to the book cover, is that what he's going to roll out on 8/28? What's the meaning of that sort of defilement of the Martin Luther King anniversary? Is this his last shot to stop the hemorrhaging on the ratings, or what is it? Is it just a big book party?
We'll see. I mean, it's changed even since he rolled it out in November, what it's going to be about, what it means. We'll find out. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of language he brings to that podium, whether it is the sort of, religious sort of movement head that he's trying to position himself as, or whether it's more of a crass book release party. We'll find out. But the 9/12 Project across the country is already mobilizing, and I think it's too early to write off Glenn Beck. A lot of buses are going to be rolling into D.C., and I'd caution people about reading too much into the recent 2010 television ratings dip. That's just one platform in his empire, and he's been very conscious about building up a multi-platform empire that can survive any single dip.
Not conscious about what he's saying, but conscious about making money. He's an expert at it. There's no question of it. Alexander Zaitchik, the author of Common Nonsense, Glenn Beck, and the Triumph of Ignorance. Many thanks. And the rest of the quote was the Paraclete of Caborca. I think that's what it was. Anyway, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.